Kurt Bardella, former House Oversight Committee spokesman. And Kurt, you and I have talked about this a lot. You've talked about it a lot on MSNBC, and you've written articles about it. It is impossible to ignore that we've had one whole year of the previous president naming the coronavirus the China virus, and even worse terms than that. Do you connect that to what we're seeing in this upsurge in violence?
Yeah, Joy, this is a situation where the numbers don't lie. Since March of 2020, there have been more than 3,700 hate crimes against Asian Americans in this country. We have seen a 150% increase in hate crimes against the AAPI community. We're seeing violence and mayhem targeted in the most disgusting, unimaginable ways happening just in front of businesses, on public streets, riding public transit. And it's only escalating and getting worse. We saw just the other week in a congressional hearing about hate crimes against Asian Americans, the Republican Party, the very Republican Party responsible for almost giving permission and allowing people to perpetrate these type of crimes against Asian Americans, we saw them make light of it. We saw Congressman Chip Roy use a lynching reference at a hate crime hearing. This is all cause and effect. And the data that keeps coming out keeps telling the same story. Republican rhetoric was out there putting targets on the backs of Asian Americans. Crimes and hate crimes and violence against Asian Americans keeps going up.
And we have data now. Richard Louis was on. He's got a great new book out, and he was talking about data that was going to come out about AAPI people and violence, and it's now been released today. And the question is, have you ever been a victim of a hate crime? Verbal or physical abuse to property caused by race or ethnicity. 27% of Asian Americans report yes. 24% of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. 22% is the national average. AAPI women report 55% of AAPI women have experienced specific incidences of racism in the past 2 years, such as being called a racial slur. So we're now seeing that there's quantifiable data. And some of these surveys, I should note, were conducted both in English and also in Korean and in Chinese, which is new for polling. So thank God we're finally getting some updates. But what do we do to turn it back, to turn this back?
Well, I think we're seeing some of these right steps happen now, like just the idea of being able to get the right data and being able to reach out to the AAPI community in the language that they speak. We're seeing with the initiative today that the president announced a real concerted effort to expand investment in data about hate crimes and violence, using more resources to help fund different initiatives that affect the AAPI community. $49.5 million in funding to help AAPI victims of domestic violence and assault. The COVID Equity Task Force being launched. More coordination between the entire federal government, from HHS to DOJ. A real concerted effort to look at the role of law enforcement. There's a reason why so many hate crimes go unreported.
Yeah, and I think there's a connection here, an intersectional connection, because we've seen that this happened to the LGBTQ community, where you've had hate crimes that are associated with the attitudes people have. This whole thing about trans kids, it's going to produce more bullying and more hate and more, terror for young trans kids. It's like people don't understand there is a direct relationship, which is why I love what Lil Nas X is doing. Sorry, but he's basically saying we're going to push back because we have cultural agency, and we just don't have to sit there and take it, even in hip hop, which is not an easy place to be LGBTQ. Let's talk a little bit about some of the breaking news while I have you just for a moment. This is a hard turn, but there is this Matt Gaetz news tonight. I got to ask you about it. What are your thoughts? He's denying it. He is saying that this is a plot against him by a DOJ official. He's been one of the people that's been one of the big culture warriors for Donald Trump. He's out there very loud and proud doing that. And now he finds himself in this position, being investigated over alleged sexual relationship with a 17-year-old. Your thoughts?
Well, how shocking is it that the party that funded and supported Roy Moore in Alabama is a party that's produced a Matt Gaetz? The idea that Matt Gaetz can be allowed to sit on the House Judiciary Committee, which has oversight over the Justice Department, as this investigation is being conducted is ridiculous. He needs to recuse himself. The Republican leadership needs to remove him from the committee until this is resolved. And I think it's important to point out that this is an investigation that began under the previous occupant of the Justice Department, Attorney General Bill Barr. This isn't partisan. This isn't a Democrat versus Republican situation. This is an investigation that began last year. It's now become public, and Matt Gaetz has a lot of explaining to do.
Yeah, under William Barr. Here's Michael Schmidt, the reporter who broke the story from the New York Times earlier.
They're investigating whether he had a sexual relationship with and whether he paid for her to travel, interstate travel. Now, that being that the girl was under 18 and that Gates was, they're investigating whether Gates was sleeping with, had a relationship with her, that raises a host of legal questions about whether Gates broke the law.
Just as a political matter, Kurt, he is claiming that this is a plot by a former DOJ official to bribe him. That's what he's claiming in a Twitter storm. But as you said, this was an investigation that started under Bill Barr's Justice Department. Could this be the breaking point between Gates world and Trump world? Because this is the Trump DOJ he's talking about.
Well, I'll tell you, the one thing that we've seen when it comes to anything related to Donald Trump is there's no low that's too low for him to still associate with you, particularly when it comes to issues of potential sexual harassment and inappropriate conduct. Donald Trump is himself a long history of sexual harassment and inappropriate conduct. So it seems like in today's Donald Trump Republican-led world, things like this somehow get you promoted within the Republican Party. We'll see what ultimately the facts are.